Shutdown, day 6. Some lawmakers are back on Capitol Hill, but a budget agreement to end the stalemate seems a long way off. Vatican visit, why the Holy See's Secretary of State is spending 5 days in Iraq. Clergy abuse scandal. A Catholic priest and a prominent Catholic professor examine a difficult year for the church and the faithful. And giving a lift to a former garage. How an Italian man created a nativity scene that's been visited by 2 million people. On EWTN News Nightly for this third day of Christmas, December 27th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thanks for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Lauren Ashburn. Day 6 of the government shutdown. Some senators are back in Washington, but they haven't reached a budget deal. President Trump says he'll do whatever it takes to get money for border security. He calls on Democrats to fund a border wall. The president tweets, "Do the Dems realize that most of the people not getting paid are Democrats?" Virginia Democratic Senator Mark Warner calls that outrageous. He adds federal employees don't go to work wearing red or blue jerseys. Warner says the president is treating them like poker chips at one of his failed casinos. Iraqi lawmakers demand U.S. troops leave the country. They're upset with President Trump's surprise stop yesterday. The president says he has no plans to bring home the 5,200 troops. President Trump celebrates America's forces in Iraq. Tweeting this morning, "Just returned from visiting our troops in Iraq and Germany. One thing is certain. We have incredible people representing our country, people that know how to win." He and the First Lady landed back in Washington before dawn today, closing out the unannounced trip to Al-Assad Air Force Base west of Baghdad. On the ground in Iraq, he told the audience his decision to withdraw the roughly 2,000 troops from Syria is in line with his plan to put America first.
Thank you, fellas. We're no longer the suckers, folks, and people aren't looking at us as suckers. And I love you, folks, because most of you are nodding your head this way. We're respected again as a nation. We're respected again.
But lawmakers from both blocs of Iraq's divided parliament are now up in arms, upset at the lack of notice of President Trump's visit. They've called for a vote to kick out U.S. troops. And here at home, Congressman Jimmy Panetta, a Democrat from California, calls the president's visit a stunt.
This president is kind of a one-speed president. He only knows one thing, and that's basically holding these types of political rallies. And unfortunately, that's what we saw yesterday there in Iraq.
Defense Secretary Jim Mattis was not among the small group of top leaders making this trip with the president. Mattis resigned last week. Deputy Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan will take over in an acting capacity January 1st. American forces left Iraq in 2011. But Iraq invited them back in 2014 to help battle ISIS. President Trump isn't the only dignitary visiting Iraq. The Vatican's Secretary of State also showed up. Cardinal Pietro Parolin arrived today in Erbil. It's part of a 5-day visit. He's celebrating Mass and meeting government and church leaders. A Vatican court hands down its first money laundering verdict. It says an Italian builder is guilty. Angelo Proetti is accused of using his Holy See bank account illegally. He faces 2.5 years in prison. The Vatican made money laundering a crime in 2010 as part of its financial reforms. Saudi Arabia's king shakes up the kingdom's cabinet. It's a response to the death of a journalist. King Salman's overhaul of top government posts includes naming a new foreign minister. It follows Saudi agents 3 months ago killing journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Police and protesters in eastern Congo clash. Police fired bullets and tear gas. The protesters are angry over another delay in the presidential election. Election officials say an Ebola outbreak will make it impossible for more than 1 million people to vote Sunday. Critics say it's just the latest excuse to disrupt the election. It was originally scheduled for 2016. The United Arab Emirates reopens its embassy in Syria for the first time in 7 years. The move reflects an improved relationship between Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and some of his Arab foes. And a new warning in Indonesia. Weather officials raised the danger level for a deadly volcano. They're raising the volcano's alert status to the second highest level, and the danger zone has more than doubled. The volcano already triggered a tsunami, killing at least 430 people It also caused part of an island to collapse into the sea. Catholics want action in dealing with the clergy sex abuse crisis erupting this year. Lauren Ashburn spoke with two experts on the church and the abuse crisis. They talk about challenges and the way forward.
Joining me now from Princeton, New Jersey is Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University, and here in the studio, Father Paul Sullins, a Senior Research Associate at the Ruth Institute, a global nonprofit that studies and helps find solutions to the impact of the sexual revolution. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be with you this morning.
Robbie, welcome to the program. We'll begin with you today. Allegations of sexual abuse against Archbishop Theodore McCarrick received widespread attention in June of this year, and then in August we got the grand jury report from Pennsylvania detailing credible allegations of abuse over 7 decades by 300 priests, thousands of victims. Looking back, Robbie, over these past 6 months, what has the immediate impact of this crisis been on the Catholic Church?
Well, it's been profound because what has been exposed is deep corruption in the church, and corruption that goes very high up in the church. We still don't know how high up, we still don't know how extensive, but we know that it is deep and we know that it is extensive. And while it is horrible to know that such a circumstance exists now for us Catholics, it's better that we know than that we continue on in ignorance. If we're going to deal with the problem, we've got a very serious problem on our hands here. If we're going to deal with the problem, first we have to know that we've got a problem, and we have to recognize that we have a problem, and we have to take the measure of the problem, and that's the challenge for us now.
Father Sullins, I'm hearing you agree with this. In your role as parochial vicar at St. Mark the Evangelist in Maryland, what are you hearing on the ground from people you minister to? Is it the same? Is it profound, as Robbie says?
Yeah, it's shaken the faith of Catholics at every level. There are people who have said, I'm not coming back to church, and then they may wander back in after a few months. But I can't imagine a scenario that would more effectively corrode the already waning trust of Catholics in the church hierarchy than what has occurred over the last few months.
Robbie, in our poll, which I have talked to you about, our News Nightly exclusive poll of Catholic voters, it was taken in September. 56% of respondents said that the U.S. Catholic bishops did a fair or poor job handling allegations of clergy sex abuse. Do you think that sentiment will have a lasting impact on bishops?
It depends on what happens now. It depends on what they do now. And not just the USCCB, but the Holy Father, Pope Francis, and the people close to him. Either we will or we will not have a full and independent investigation into the corruption in the church, into the sex abuse, into the unchastity of clergy and even bishops, into the cover-ups, into the networks. If we do not, the long-term corrosive consequences, and Father Sullins has used exactly the right word, corrode, the corrosive consequences will be almost unimaginably horrible. But if those in authority do the right thing and they order a full and independent investigation so that we can get to the facts, for example, and critically, what did Theodore McCarrick do? And who knew what he was doing, and when did they know it?
Okay.
If we get that kind of independent investigation so that we can get the knowledge, then the damage will have been limited.
All right, we are going to be right back after this commercial break. We have Robert George of Princeton University, Father Sullins. We're going to talk about your work, Father, with the Ruth Institute. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We have Robert George of Princeton University via satellite, Father Sullins here in studio. You, in addition to working at Catholic University and as a parochial vicar at a parish, you also have a role at the Ruth Institute. And at the Ruth Institute, you've studied the role of sexual orientation in this sex abuse scandal. What have you found?
I found that the percent of priests who reported that they had a same-sex attraction rose through the 1960s and 70s to reach a height of about 16% in the early 1980s. And coincident with that was the rise of these homosexual subcultures in seminaries that we've heard so much about. And so that correlated almost perfectly. It was a 0.97 correlation with the preference for abusing males rather than females in clergy misconduct with minors, and also with the incidence of sex abuse. So there's a strong correlation between a growing share of priests who report that they have homosexual attractions and growing sex abuse through the 1980s. Now, since that time, it has declined. The abuse has declined. We don't know, because we don't have the data on what the share or percent or presence of homosexual priests are today. But that's the substance of my research in that.
Robbie George, let me come back to you at Princeton University. The Vatican ordered the U.S. bishops to not talk about this, not resolve the issue until the Pope's global bishop meeting in February, which will focus on the topic. There was widespread criticism of this move. This impact on Pope Francis, I think, was significant. What are your thoughts?
The longer action is delayed, the more damage that will be done. The deeper the breach of trust that Father Sullins mentioned will go. So it is imperative. It is absolutely imperative that the bishops act swiftly on this, and that Rome permit them to act, and that Rome cooperate in the investigation that needs to go forward and in the reforms that need to be made. By the way, Lauren, can I commend Father Sullins on his very important sociological work? It takes courage to do the kind of work that he is doing, and he's doing it well, and I want to commend him for that. It's very important. That itself is an important contribution, Father, to the reforms that we need.
We can't have this discussion, Father and Robbie, without talking about the victims of clergy sex abuse. Right. We need to keep the focus on them. How can the church help them in their healing? What are you seeing on the ground at your parish?
Well, I think of the words of our Lord, who said that the children among us exemplify the greatest in the kingdom of God. And whenever I see a child come up for in the communion line, I pay a special attention to that child. I try to exemplify that. But I think part of our way forward as Catholics is to realize that the children among us are more important than priests and bishops and popes, that they are the first thing. So ways that we can figure out to honor, to listen to pray for, to show our love and care for those who have been victims of this abuse as children would be wonderful. I was thinking, I don't know if anyone can do this, but you know, we have a calendar in the church of saints where we liturgically and kind of sociologically remember in a systematic way those persons of holiness who have gone before us. What a wonderful thing if we could have some sort of systematic way to remember the victims of abuse and to pray for them on a regular basis.
Robbie, before we go, that question goes to you, our final question.
What we need is truth and action. We have to remember that there are victims who are minors. There are victims who are not minors. Also among the victims are the good priests and bishops, the thousands upon thousands of good priests and bishops whose reputations have been sullied by the actions of bad priests and bishops who've engaged in this kind of abuse. They too are victims. We need truth and action, and that's really what victims want most and what victims deserve most is truth and action. We need to fix the problem so there won't be future victims.
We have to leave it there. Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University, thank you, and Father Paul Sullins, Senior Research Associate at the Ruth Institute. All right, thank you so much, gentlemen. A very important discussion.
And thanks, Lauren Ashburn, for that very important interview. The Knights of Columbus respond to criticism from two Democratic lawmakers. Senators Mazie Hirono and Kamala Harris questioned a federal judicial nominee's membership in the organization. A Washington, D.C. council invites the senators to join them in their charitable work. The Knights of Columbus supports our newscast, EWTN News Nightly. A Catholic nun and television star has died. Sister Wendy Beckett was 88 years old. The art historian hosted a series of shows and documentaries for the BBC. Sister Wendy was famous for standing in front of paintings and talking about them with neither a script nor a teleprompter. May she rest in peace. Up next, we'll show you a nativity scene in Rome that's drawn 2 million visitors, including a pope. Glad to have you with us on EWTN News Nightly. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. You're not going to want to miss this next story. It's one of those you liked best on social media. Cardinal Luis Tagle of Manila has some advice for graduates as they start out in life. Pay attention to people who are ignored.
Exclusion and alienation and disappearance of persons need your urgent attention.
Cardinal Tagle offered the advice during his May 2018 graduation speech at St. John's University in New York City, right after EWTN contributor Colm Flynn spoke with the Filipino Cardinal.
Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, it's a pleasure to meet you and thank you very much for doing this interview.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You were 55 when you became a cardinal?
Yes.
And I remember seeing that footage and you were in tears. You were crying. Why was that moment so emotional?
I guess it was a mixture of, I did not expect it. When I look back, I say, my being a priest started with a joke. And then when I was named a bishop, I cried and I said, I am not prepared for that. I don't even see myself as a bishop. And I have to confess, even up to now, I struggle with that. I don't see myself as a bishop. And I sometimes doubt myself.
And why is that?
I think that I was prepared to teach. I was prepared to be a theology researcher, and I was still struggling with that, how to become a bishop.
But are you comfortable now with the role as cardinal?
Not to be comfortable in the sense that that it becomes routine. No, I don't want that to happen. When I say comfortable, for me, it is to accept in faith, whatever the demands may be.
The Philippines is a fascinating country, a booming country. Yeah. Over 106 million people is the population.
They say at least 100 million.
100 million people.
At least. Yeah.
A lot of them, of course, living in poverty, around 25% of them below the poverty line. What do you see as the biggest challenges today for the Filipino people?
The scandal of dehumanizing poverty, and it has become systemic. Many things are changing, but the living conditions of some people have remained stagnant or even worse. And I call this a scandal because it reflects to us how justice is lived, how the common good is pursued or not pursued. So these are the principles of the social gospel. And in a country that is predominantly Christian, even Catholic, we are really stabbed at the heart, It's like a dagger pointed at our consciences.
And do you see it as something that's getting better? Or is it getting worse? Is it staying stagnant?
When you look at the statistics, they say that the economy of the Philippines is improving.
But you don't see that among the ordinary people?
Yes, and also the past 7 years, there's been a steady growth in the economy, but also a growth in the number of poor people.
Well, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you too, thank you, I enjoyed it.
A Wonderful Life What started out as a hobby for a Roman street cleaner has turned into a decades-old Christmas attraction. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley takes us on a tour.
4 aqueducts, 24 caves, and the little town of Bethlehem recreated down to the finest of details. More than 2 million guests have visited this nativity scene, according to the City of Rome authorities, since it was built in 1972 in what used to be a garage for garbage trucks.
Faccio un presepe talmente così bello che verrà pure il Papa a vederlo.
Meet its creator, retired street cleaner Giuseppe Ianni. He says when he started the creche in his spare time, he told skeptical colleagues he'd make a nativity scene so beautiful that even the Pope would come and see it. Well, at least 3 popes have come over the last 46 years. First Pope Paul VI, then Pope John Paul II, who Giuseppe says visited a total of 24 times, and then Pope Benedict XVI.
E la gente che entra dentro, che va dentro Gesù,
Giuseppe says visitors feel like they are witnessing the birth of Jesus.
stanno il piede alla paglia.
The base of the nativity scene and its outer walls are made from more than 2,200 stones from all over the world. The creche is open year-round and attracts up to 2,000 visitors a day, Giuseppe tells us.
Although entry is free, donations of stones are requested so that the collection, which already includes a rock from Bethlehem and a meteorite, can be expanded. In Rome, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
What an interesting story and such a great nativity scene. I hope to see it someday in my life too. And we thank you for watching EWTN News Nightly. For the entire team, Merry Christmas. We'll be back tomorrow with reports from Rome. Good night and God bless.